Okay, we'll start off with wind. Of course, that's the first one up there. Wind is the fastest growing segment of the alternative energy market. Even though I said I don't want to use that term, alternative energy, but it's still, people usually think of one or the other. And a big part of this is because it can be very practical to own a wind turbine, very profitable. Excuse me. And so if you're in a location where you've got steady winds and you're close to the grid, and you can afford $3 million to buy a wind turbine, you can hook that baby up and make tens of thousands of dollars a year just by having it there on your property. So, but wind energy is definitely geographically limited, which means what? Geographically limited. Yeah, Shane? What? Not a lot of places that you have a constant minimum 12 mile per hour wind on a regular basis, and that's what it called. That's what's generally the guidelines for being able to have a productive wind energy output. They're designing some that work at lower wind speeds and some that handle gusts and everything as well, but those aren't ideal conditions. Ideal conditions are where you're in an area where the wind is pretty constant on an almost daily basis. You get a minimum 12 miles per hour of wind. We don't get that here in Florida, in Central Florida. There are areas along the coast that do, and coastlines are ideal for wind energy because they do tend to have that constant, though not high. Really high winds is not good, as you might imagine. And these things are designed to stop working usually after about 45 miles per hour, because if they don't, the input, the energy that goes through it would, in one case, blew them up. There's a video, I think, on YouTube where it shows a wind turbine that either the mechanism to disengage it didn't work or just didn't have one, and gusts of 60, 80 miles per hour, and it caused it to explode because it overheated the generator and everything in it. So that is because it is actually a high quality source of energy. There is quite a bit of power in there, and as a matter of fact, one of those big wind turbines will generate about 3 megawatts of energy, and that's a lot. That is, your average coal-fired plant generates about 50 megawatts of electricity. So that's a whole plant devoted to generating electricity, and just one of these wind turbines under optimal conditions will deliver, about a 15th of that. So that's pretty high quality. Does have definite geographical limitations, and that's the only thing restricting it from being more popular, but it is the fastest growing segment of the so-called alternative energy market. They do use actually relatively large amounts of land. All right, so now this is kind of a situation of depending upon where you are. Because the footprint of one of these structures it's not huge. It's like maybe a quarter of the size of the room, the base that it sits on. But if you're going to have them, you've got to have clear land. So if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to have a wind farm in this forested area, you would have to clear out the whole forest to use it. Because the wind, not only do the propellers and everything obviously have to move, the propellers are pretty big, the trees would block the wind and it wouldn't be practical. So that's even though, like I said, the physical size of it's not that great, but the amount of area that it needs. But in grasslands, like I said, ranchers are making use of these and generating, basically becoming their own power companies, because if you do have an open field area, you can put them out there, and the cattle don't seem to have a problem with it and things like that. But they, in general, they do require a fair amount of land to put up there. Also, as you might imagine, they have a definite impact on bird and bat populations. At the beginning, they simply run into them and kills them, obviously. But after a while, they figure it out and they just avoid it. But what that means is you're pushing these particular animals out of that area. Another thing that is an issue with wind power is that they create noise pollution, and that's annoying to people, but also it also pushes these animals away from those areas, Whenever you do that, it's like a refugee problem. Ecosystems are usually maxed out population-wise. That's how natural selection works, and you end up getting everything in what they call carrying capacity. Stuff we'll talk about later. But what that means is that if you take organisms out of one area and for whatever reasons you push them into other areas, you will significantly impact that area that they're going into. And therefore, you know, you have a lot bigger effects than just, oh, they'll just move out of the way and they'll go live in this part of the woods and stuff like that. It doesn't work that way. That causes a lot of environmental, ecological impacts that spread beyond that. So that's part of what I mean by the fact that the physical structure of it is not huge. However, the amount of land and everything that basically changes or alters is pretty big for wind farms. Particularly if they're going to actually be a farm. A lot of times they're isolated, but they're going to actually devote a serious amount of land to it. It has a large amount of habitat that it needs to take up. So this also, what they found is that with birds at least, if they're migratory birds and these wind farms or these wind turbines disrupt their migration patterns, that can be disastrous for a flock of birds. They have to refuel at certain areas, so it's kind of like if you don't plan your trip right, you can run out of gas, except they're running out of gas means they starve to death. So we have seen, that has been shown, documented, that there have been definite impacts where wind turbines have been put in, definite impacts on the bird and bat populations. All right, questions about wind as a source of energy? Geothermal is constant. When you have geothermal available, that hot magma is there, of course, all the time. So it's not a problem with being intermittent like this one. And by the way, back on wind for a minute, remember that if they are intermittent, then you need to have, you want to use it as a constant power supply, then you'll need a backup or storage, just like solar. Geothermal, on the other hand, is constant. But it is also geographically limited, has limited availability around the world, more so than wind, anyway, because if you think about it, there's not that many places around the world where it is volcanic in those areas. As we become better at drilling, we open up more opportunities with this particular type of energy resource. So you can, the more you can drill down, the deeper you can drill down, the easier it is to drill down, the more you can access this heat source. Okay, and that's something, believe it or not, that is something engineering-wise that is constantly being developed and worked on, because of course we're getting to not only that, but getting to oil, getting to precious metal resources, all those kind of things involve drilling into the crust of the earth. And so that's actually a whole, like I said, a whole field of technology is devoted to doing that. And as we get better at that, these things become more reliable. What you get from there is hot enough to boil water, so you know that anytime you have a heat source that's hot enough to boil water, you can run a steam turbine and generate electricity, or of course you could use that heat directly. So just bring it up through pipes, steam comes up through pipes and everything, and use it like a radiator. You can do it that way. Or like I said, it is hot enough that you can generate electricity from it as well. Sometimes these areas, like if it's Yellowstone, for example, which, as you might imagine, uses a lot of geothermal, they have their own water source, so their own natural water source, so you get the steam already. Some of them, they are dry, and so they will use a water resource to do that. So that is an impact of it, or a cost of it, is the fact that it does require water to be used. That water is basically used up and in the process. And so those are your main pluses and benefits. The biggest one, the biggest drawback is your very few places where you can actually use it. But it is good constant source, and it is low impact on the environment. It's kind of expensive to set them up as well, as you might imagine. They've got a lot of backup things and everything that goes with it. But otherwise, relatively good for the environment. Also, there is a water resource usage. There's some air pollution that is generated a little bit that's from these things, and I'll show you that in a minute. Finally, biomass. Biomass, the oldest type of energy resource. So that would count whenever people figured out how to light a piece of wood on fire, they were utilizing an energy resource. That wood is biomass because it is recently living. Well, it's either recently living or it comes from something that is recently or currently living. And what I mean by that is it's either the bodies of an organism, which would be the case if you have a tree, or the waste products of an organism. So feces can be used as a source and has been used as a source. Dung has been used as a source of heat and energy for a long time. If you think about the kind of societies and tribal groups where they raised cattle or whatever kind of grazing herbivore they would do that. They would live on the grasslands. Grasslands don't have a lot of trees, so they need a resource to burn. They had plenty of cow poop, and it burns quite well. And if you've ever been around horses or cows or anything else like that, their dung is, it's got a lot more fiber in it, doesn't smell nearly as bad, doesn't have nearly as much sulfur in it as carnivore, omnivore, so it's not as bad as you may think using that as a source of fuel, but that is an example of biomass. But then another thing nowadays that they're doing with biomass, so much more recent developments, is taking these natural products and producing or converting them into something, in particular something that will burn in a standard internal combustion engine, like you have cars and trucks and stuff. So you can burn it directly. And by the way, in burning, you can use that heat just as a source of heat, or you can use that heat to run a steam engine, run a steam turbine. Biomass, one example of biomass is garbage. So in some areas it's common to take the garbage. They're taking out the plastic, so that would be a fossil fuel if you're really getting technical about it. But a lot of what's left is food waste and paper from the garbage, and they will then burn that in one of these power plants and generate electricity from it. One of the problems to be solved with energy resources is to find something that our vehicles can run off of easily, and that has been done to a certain extent with biomass in the case of converting it either to natural gas. By the way, it's easy to run an internal combustion engine off of natural gas or propane. It's a very simple conversion, and they run actually better off that than gasoline. They'll run for a longer period of time. Biodiesel is basically usually they use cooking oil or used cooking oil. You may know if you've ever worked in a place that has the big deep fat fryers, they've got to dispose of that. Sometimes they'll take that old fryer oil and sell it to an electrical generating company. They can burn that in there. But also, after filtering it, it doesn't take much treatment to make what's known as biodiesel, and most diesel engines will run completely fine off of biodiesel fuel. So that's a win-win kind of situation. Plus, you're driving around smelling like French fries. You can't French fries and fried chicken. Can't beat that. But that's an example of something that's done that can be put into an automobile and used. But the most common way to do it is to convert it into ethanol. It's actually one of also the most famous, or not famous, most old-fashioned ways of converting biomass energy, but a lot of times that was converted into that not as a fuel source, but as a what source?
Drinking?
A drinking source. Yeah, this is the ethanol that's in alcoholic beverages and comes from fermentation. So, but you may notice also at the fuel pump, where do you see this particular word? Ethanol. What's it tell you about your fuel, your gasoline, those you have ever fueled up? Up to what?
Flammable.
Well, it's flammable, yeah, of course. Yeah. What about the composition? Up to 10% of this gasoline, not corn, although it's made from corn. Ethanol. Up to 10% of your gasoline contains ethanol. It'll tell you that on there. Almost every gas station, that's the case for it now. And this is, like I said, this has been the biggest application of biofuels, is the mixing of it with gasoline. This is relatively new. This happened in 2008, I think, somewhere in that time period when demand for oil was so high, because that was before the economy crashed. Demand for oil was so high, not only in the United States, but also in China and India, that gas prices went up to about $4 a gallon. And then as an industry, and I don't know if the government had anything to do with it, but they just decided to say, hey, let's start to produce ethanol as a fuel and reduce our usage of foreign oil. And so that's the big inspiration for the gasoline ethanol mixtures. Pretty much all cars can run off of up to 10%. And if you have a flex fuel car, they can run off of up to, I think, 85% ethanol.
Where would you get like a mixture like that? 85%?
Of up to 85%? I don't know. You could make your own moonshine, I guess, and toss it in the tank. But so you can pull over and just sip some out of the gas tank as you're going along or whatever. Yeah. So this has been done, like I said, with a flex fuel car. You can run a higher amount of ethanol in your gasoline. That is the most common case of your conversion of biomass fuels into something they can run off of. Biomass is carbon neutral. So here's one of the environmental benefits of it. I want you guys to make sure you understand what carbon neutral means. This has to do with the issue of greenhouse gases, in particular, carbon dioxide. Okay, so you can look at my little diagram over here, the artiste that I am, and you can see that there's corn there, believe it or not. That green part is a stalk of corn. I have a yellow marker. As it is growing through photosynthesis, what's it absorbing out of the atmosphere? CO2. Okay, we want to reduce the problems with global warming and the excess greenhouse gases. We want to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay, so then you take that ethanol, take that corn, turn it into ethanol, put it in the tank of a car, burn it. That carbon that was in there, that came from here, is going to be oxidized. It's going to react with oxygen in the air and produce carbon dioxide again. That's why all organic things, when they burn, produce carbon dioxide. And so it's going to go right back in the atmosphere to be absorbed again. So there's no net gain if you're just burning ethanol. There's no net increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's coming from that. If, however, you take your carbon source from underground, from fossil fuel deposits to petroleum, and put it in the vehicle, then when you burn that and the carbon dioxide is released, that is a new source of carbon dioxide that increases carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, because you're basically releasing the CO2 that was in the atmosphere 200 million years ago. So that's why burning fossil fuels is not carbon neutral, whereas burning biomass fuels is. Is everybody clear on that, what carbon neutral means? How that does not cause a net increase in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere? Okay? Yeah.
Are we likely to keep producing more ethanol, like steadily?
All right, that's a good question. Let me cover that and whether or not we're going to stay down this road and why don't we do this only, etc. And that has to do, well, here's one issue, big issue with using biomass fuel. Not so much with ethanol, but with like using garbage or wood, or chicken farmers, for example, sell their chicken poop. Some of the times they sell for fertilizer, but they also will sell it with these waste to energy plants and produce those. They produce high amounts of air pollution. And you may remember when we talked about air pollution, I said that the less pure your fuel is, the more air pollution you're going to get from it. Okay? So either way that happens. But then also, as you might imagine, if you're raising this corn and everything for ethanol consumption, that's kind of like saying, oh, we have all this extra land to grow corn on, or we have all this leftover corn. We don't. Typically, there's some crops that they subsidize and stuff like that, but in general, you know, in particular with corn, sugarcane is another one. Those are some of your highest volume crops that are grown around the world. Part of it's for fuel, and then part of it is for the rest is for food, of course. You still have all that environmental impact of raising these biofuels, okay, with fertilizer, pesticides, and all that kind of stuff, just like the things we talked about, the agriculture impact. And that means that if you're raising more of them for fuel, you're raising less for food, or that which is going to be devoted to being grown for food is going to be more expensive. There's a limited amount. We could not devote every single acre in the United States to growing corn or sugar cane or whatever other type of food you would turn into ethanol. It would not supply our fuel needs for the United States on any given day. So that's an issue also. That's one of the things about fossil fuels that you could call on you could say it's on the good side, because you've got millions of years of productivity that you're tapping into when you go into fossil fuels. If you're just going to use biomass, you've got only the productivity of the earth at this very moment, or this particular year for a crop. Most crops grow every year. So that's limited. There's only a certain amount. Granted, it is regenerating, it's renewable, so that's a good thing on a practical level, but there's just not enough of it. Michael, does that somewhat answer your question? Or yeah, because there's, this is a nice little addition to our gasoline mixture, so we can reduce how much petroleum we use. It's good from the CO2 perspective. It is carbon neutral, and also you've got win-win when you're taking garbage and stuff like that would normally be waste, and you have to get rid of it, turning it into electricity. But it does have a lot of its environmental problems, and like I said, there's just not enough capacity to meet our fuel needs by trying to grow it like a crop. That's just not going to work. So, any questions about wind, geothermal, biomass, good, bad, or either wise? No? All right. Thank you.